I'm very excited to be here today. On this very stage in the last 3 years have been some heroes of mine. You had Scott Tinker here, Dr. Scott Tinker, and if anybody's seen his PBS special that's in 100 million households, or his documentaries, has been in thousands of university campuses in different languages around the world. That's a big deal. You had Mark Mills here, he's author, physicist. Some of the stuff that he's enlightened me to over the years has been really cool. And then Robert Bryce was here. And before that even, Chris Wright was here. So to be sharing the stage with those guys that I've followed for a long time and admire, I'm really appreciative of Kirby asking me to be here. So being from Texas, I'm probably going to bring a little bit different perspective, maybe. My place here, I didn't know that I would find myself with an energy company with my name on the door. So I'm from deep South Texas along the Mexican border where I grew up. Went to university there, a little college called Texas A&M Kingsville. Got my chemical engineering degree. The only reason I got my chemical engineering degree because that was the highest paying undergraduate degree that university offered. I went from working around the cotton fields and grain fields of my little hometown of Agua Dulce, Texas, to going to have an engineering internship and making a lot more money in the oil field than I did. My mom and dad are school teachers. They're at the little school that I went to. The little high school is so small. I think I graduated with 28 people. And so I was barely made the top 10%. I was number 2 in the class, town of 700. So to find myself at this stage in life is, I probably shouldn't be here. And when I think about the journey that I've been on, the first, say, 10 years of my life, I worked in the field. I worked in gas plants, on pipelines. I was the field engineer. When I started, I was kind of the roustabout that ended up being a field engineer eventually. And then worked my way into management. And then I remember buying my first pair of slacks and business shoes, moving to Dallas, Texas, out of the oil field, and getting a job with a publicly traded company. And through that tenure, I ended up being the president of a Fortune 100 company. Y'all know them as Energy Transfer today. At that time, they were still Energy Transfer, but they were a much smaller company then. They were only a Fortune 100 company then. Today, they're probably Fortune 50 or better. But I left that job, and I call that chapter 1 because whenever I think about working in a publicly traded company, there's a certain way you need to speak, a certain way you need to follow the herd. And some of the projects we did while I was there, some of the largest shale projects ever when the Barnett Shale was found in the early 2000s, we laid the first 42-inch pipeline in the state of Texas, hundreds of thousands of horsepower of compression. My team did about $7 billion of projects originated, completed, contracted, and completed and operating, still operating today. And I kind of wore myself out. So again, chapter 1. Whenever I quit that job with no game plan, I wanted to start something new. I wanted to have some fulfillment. I wanted to work for a meaningful endeavor. I wanted to be in San Antonio, Texas. I wanted to have some ownership in what I was working for and felt like I was having meaning in the work that I was conducting. That's what I called it. This was 2011, by the way. And the company that I started, Howard Energy Partners, and we'll talk about it a little bit today. Today, we operate in 4 states and the country of Mexico. Our diversity of assets, we have anywhere from traditional pipelines to cryogenic processing plants, to hydrogen plants, to port facilities, renewable diesel facilities, all sorts of cool things that we'll talk about on the lower carbon side of things a little bit later in the talk. But this just gives you a sense of what we've done the last 14 years and what I'm calling a meaningful endeavor. And we'll talk about how we came up with the purpose of our company, which is to deliver positive energy. Because you can imagine, I've had all the success early on in my career. I quit a very good job that my parents thought I was an idiot for quitting to start a company with 8 employees and no assets. And then the background of what the oil and gas looks like is this. It's a dirty industry. Your name is on the door. How are you possibly a meaningful endeavor? That's a hard one to get your head around, especially at the last 10 years, when oil and gas was lumped in with alcohol, tobacco, firearms, pornography, kind of the uninvestable industries. And I'm out raising money for an oil and gas traditional company. And how could I question the negative rhetoric when the background in the media, what you read about these days, is some really interesting facts. We know since the Industrial Revolution kind of ended in 1850 that the Earth has warmed up about 1 degree Celsius. The engineers in the room knows about, that's more than a Fahrenheit, and the burning of fossil fuels in our daily lives, putting CO2 into the atmosphere and other greenhouse gas emissions, warming up the planet, causes polar ice caps to melt. We know that oceans have risen 8 inches in the last 120 years. That's just data. It's not an opinion. The other thing you read about a lot in the background noise is how many wildfires are going on. Forget what has happened historically. Forget that we've now built into forest that it's always had wildfires. But what we would say today or hear today is how many wildfires are out there. In 2021 statistics in the U.S., there was 3.5 million acres burned due to wildfires. So when you hear this negative rhetoric and what is in people's minds, and you tell them in the oil and gas business, you're pretty ashamed. Especially coming from a small town in South Texas like I come from, shame is a real deal. And I did not want to be working for an industry that was actually hurting the planet. So I had the decision to make to what direction I wanted to take my company. What industry do I want to be invested in? I knew oil and gas very well, mostly the midstream space. And so I wanted to see if there's other investable industries adjacent to that I could do. And I investigated quite a few. And in that investigation, I started finding people that shared this stage with me. Back then, this was 10 years ago, I had no idea I'd be here in 10 years. But learning about the planet and learning facts and data that counter this narrative of our future is very dim. I started finding out that no, actually our future is very bright. One of the interesting books I read, it was published in 2018 after his death, but while he had pancreatic cancer, his name was Hans Rosling, wrote a book called Factfulness. Anybody in here read Factfulness? It's a great book. And what it does is gives you a perspective of the world and how ignorant we are about the world we lived in. What he went around the world, and he spoke at the UN. He was a very well-known Swedish doctor that did a lot of work in Africa, and he believed that by educating people on the facts of the planet is going to help people make better policy decisions. And what he would articulate is that most experts can't beat a chimpanzee when they're tested on their knowledge of the planet. So he would sit in front of these rooms at the UN and people would have these little devices in front of them, and they would, he'd ask them a question, they'd put A, B, or C, and the chimpanzee beat him every time. Meaning, 33% by chance, just somebody selecting random, has a better knowledge of the planet. Let me give you, for instance, what do you think is the percentage of children on the planet that are 1 year old that have received a vaccination? What percentage of children on the planet receive a vaccination by the time they're 1 year old? Anybody? Just throw out a number. 20%? 75, 3%. We're 5% of the world's population in the U.S., by the way. 335 million people on 8 billion, we're roughly 5% of the world's population. So 85% of the children on the planet receive vaccinations. The other thing I learned in doing this research is that we've doubled life expectancy on the planet in the last 120 years. From 1900 to today, life expectancy continues to rise. It's fallen a little bit since COVID because COVID impacted us. But in general, we've continued to increase our life expectancy. The worst life expectancy on the planet is probably like Malawi or Sudan. And it is where Great Britain was in 1950 in life expectancy. And why is this? Mostly because infant mortality. Used to, in 1900, kids wouldn't make it to their fifth birthday. If you had 5 kids in your family, 2 of them died before their 5th birthday. So infant mortality has dropped drastically by 89% in the same time frame. I found that fascinating. Like, why is that? Well, increase in transportation, increase in refrigeration, better penicillin, we have antibiotics, all sorts of reasons why infants don't die at the same pace that they did in 1900. And the world is doing better. You know, the GDP in the last 150 years has grown asymptotically. You know, it's amazing what's happened in the overall prosperity of humans. What is one way that we know that is by literacy. This one really shocked me. 86% of 15 years old or older are literate on the planet. It was 21% 120 years ago. That's a sign of people doing really well. And if you read Steven Pinker's book, which is Enlightenment Now, Harvard psychologist, he goes through a lot of this too. So these non-oil and gas people that do this deep thinking about the world we live in started to change my perspective of where we are and how to think about the world. Well, let's zoom in on energy and think about where we are in energy right now. Bill Gates has tackled some of the world's biggest problems: malaria, polio, extreme poverty. Those of you that know, have watched some of the Netflix specials on getting inside the brain of Bill Gates, he's a voracious reader. His favorite author is Vaclav Smil. He says that he waits for the next Vaclav Smil book like some people wait for the next Star Wars movie. He takes a week out of his life a year, goes away, takes a stack of books, and devours these books once a year. He reads every day, but like there's this sabbatical he does that you can read about. And Vaclav Smil is his favorite. I've read a lot of Vaclav Smil's stuff. He's a professor in Manitoba, kind of a hermit these days. He's written, I think, 60 books on energy, written over 500 peer-reviewed papers on energy. He's probably the world's leading energy thinker. Fascinating that he tracks, in one of the books called Energy and Civilization and History, he tracks energy and civilization and how energy is directly tied to people doing well. What he would say is a decoupling of economic growth and energy consumption would defy the laws of thermodynamics. Thermodynamics is a tough word. I'm a chemical engineer, so that speaks to me. Thermodynamics is the laws of nature. And he is saying that economic growth and energy consumption would defy the laws of thermodynamics. In other words, there's no such thing as a low income, there's no such thing as a high income, low energy country. That's hard to get your head around. There's no such thing as a high income, low energy country. In other words, the countries that use more energy do better. I'll show you more graphically what this looks like. This is the island of Hispaniola. I've been using this for many years, and I was so excited to see the same thing in the Bettering Human Lives report. I was talking to Ryan Zorn here from Liberty, and Liberty did a great service to the industry by putting out a lot of these facts. And if you haven't read Bettering Human Lives, it's a good read, fact-based. On the left-hand side is Haiti, on the right-hand side is Dominican Republic. On the left-hand side is a country that is deforested, if you notice on the map there. On the right, there's a Caribbean destination that we all want to visit. It's 9 times the GDP in the Dominican Republic. There's 4 times the literacy rate in the Dominican Republic. Infant mortality is non-detectable in the Dominican Republic, and we're back 150 years ago in Haiti. The difference between the two countries is access to energy and what they're using for energy. Haiti uses wood and dung and what they have available to them, like we have in all of human history. On the right, they import natural gas, fuel oil, diesel, gasoline to run their daily lives. They're actually building a wall right now between the two countries to keep the Haitians out of Dominican Republic. That is energy poverty. That is the difference between living with your environment or impacting your environment to live a better life. This one example, the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere is in the Caribbean. And if you look at it at nighttime, you can see the difference. It's literally going back in time 150 years. And I believe of all the UN sustainable goals, that this is the one problem that we know how to solve. Because if energy is thermodynamically tied to GDP, we know if we get more energy to more people, we can lift more people out of poverty. Now, that sounds great, but what is poverty? Let's look at that. As we zoom out on the world and think about how we calculate poverty, the UN says that poverty is at a level that none of us would want to be at. This is Haiti or below, at $2.15 a day, $800 a year. If you look at the U.S., what do you think the U.S. is? You know, the IRS says that it's $15,000 a year. That's about $43 a day is what the U.S. IRS says. If I'm poor in the poverty line in the U.S., you have $15,000 a year of income in a single family household. That is a long way away from $2.15. Where does the world live today? According to the World Bank, the world lives, about half the world, lives at $5.50. So we know if we want to get more people from $5.50 a day all the way to $43 a day, we're going to need a lot more energy. So then you have to ask yourself the question, well, what is energy and where are we getting it from? The number one thing that you'll see, now that I pointed out, that people conflate is how wrong they have energy. Energy is not just electricity. The energy that you need to run your life, the fertilizer for your food, the diesel and gasoline for your vehicles, the jet fuel for your plane, the whatever. All the energy you need is 80% of the energy. Electricity is only 20%. So we get in these big discussions about solar, wind, geo, nuke, all that stuff. Great. That's only 20% of the energy that we need. So whenever I'm talking about energy, I'm talking about energy production, energy consumption on a global basis, and we'll get down into the U.S. a little bit, but don't conflate energy with electricity. That's just one component of energy. So in human history, on the right-hand side, this is 1800. This is going back kind of right in the middle of the Industrial Revolution. You know, we just found the first steam engine. Wood and dung is predominantly, and anything else we can burn for heat to cook or to heat up your homes, is the planet pretty much runs, and we have about 1 billion people on the planet. And then fast forward 100 years, what happens during the Industrial Revolution? We start figuring out how to use machines to do our work. When we do that, it frees up our mind to not worry about food and water, to innovate. So the innovation that happened during the Industrial Revolution happened all during the 1800s. We started moving out of the farm fields into factories, right? So in 1900, we doubled the population on the planet. Now you got 2 billion people. And now we're using more coal. So about 50% coal, 50% wood and dung and biomass, as we call it. What I find fascinating is in 1906, in San Antonio, Texas, where I live, where I'm from, where my corporate headquarters is, the very first electric automobile accident happened. We had electric vehicles in 1906, and in San Antonio, the guy that it hit was so quiet that he didn't know that it was there, and he got run over by an electric vehicle in 1906. That vehicle sits in the Whitty Museum in San Antonio. We had wind energy in 1883. We had photovoltaic cells, the first PV cells, in the 1880s also. So we've had solar, wind, electric vehicles for a very long time. And this is about the time that some of that stuff was being invented, as we're learning how to innovate machines to change our lives. Let's fast forward to the latest data that I have that's updated a little bit today in 2023, but we'll use the 2020 data. These are the sources of energy. It went from just coal, just biomass. We use multiple forms of energy today. Not a revelation for a lot of you in this room. When I'm speaking to non-energy audiences, this is quite the revelation that we've never transitioned off of any energy. We just use more energy. As we do better, we use more energy. Today we use crude oil, natural gas, coal, nuclear, wind, solar, geo, hydro, and we still burn wood and dung. And if you look over human history, these circles are to proportion on how much energy we're using today. That's a lot more energy that we use. We have 8 billion people today to feed. And everybody talks about energy transition. I would posit, and my current understanding is, there is no energy transition. Last year, this is the percentage of wood that we burned on the planet compared to the percentages of wood that we used in prior years, in prior centuries. We burn more wood every year than we ever have in human history. There's still 2 billion people. That's a quarter of the people that still burn wood for their cooking and heating of their homes. So when we talk energy transition, I get confused because the data doesn't support transition. And then when I think about the next 30 years, when I'm building this company about net zero, how are we going to get there? Because I know in the next 30 years, according to the data and the EIA, we're going to need about 40 to 50% more energy. And if I'm looking back at human history and where we came from and where we're going, where are we going to get this energy? Well, I took a shot at it. So if I move forward, let me see if it'll work. The same, starting in 2022 now, and moving forward to 2050. We still have an energy mix. It's in different proportions, but every bit of energy that we were using then, we're going to be using in the future. The math on EIA says that we're going to be burning 70% fossil fuels still in 2050. And all the numbers have been ratioed up by at least 40%. It makes it look like a transition has happened because the mix has changed. There's more hydro, there's more nuke, there's more wind, there's more solar. But as we learned, 20% is electricity. All the energy we need to run our lives, they're still going to be like this. In the U.S., let's do the same chart for the U.S., go from global energy consumption to U.S. energy consumption. According to them, we're still going to be using about 65% fossil fuels. This data is already old because with the current understanding of AI and the cloud, Mark Mills was on the stage last year. You learned a little bit about this. His book, Cloud Revolution, predicted this all the way back in 2021. Some of his early research papers that he was producing prior to the book would indicate that electric vehicles using self-driving AI potentially uses more energy than an internal combustion engine does. Because data is energy. So every bit of data you store. The other thing he taught me in that book is that one cell phone, my cell phone's on the table, one cell phone uses a refrigerator's worth of energy. Like, how is that possible? It's a little bitty battery. Because the data centers supporting that cell phone, it is already using that much data. So every cell phone you see carrying around already uses the refrigerator's worth. And that's before AI language models. The Google AI language model uses, a third of the energy than an AI language model, and that's the early ones. Will they get more efficient? Sure. But Jevons paradox will teach us that the more efficient you are in any commodity, the more of it you'll use. Because the more efficient you are, the more supply is available, the less the cost of the commodity is, so you use more of it. That's just what human history has taught us. That's Jevons paradox. So U.S. energy consumption is not going to get less in the next 30 years. We're actually going to get more. We're not going to use less natural gas, less oil, we're going to use more of it in a different proportion to other things because we need other things. So Our company decided that we're going to take a stand starting about 2018, and we're going to be pro-energy, pro-climate, and anti-poverty. It's much easier to imagine a world of continuing to do better and better than one of ultimate demise. One that is not about climate catastrophe, but one about adaptability, that we can help people get better at adapting to climate. No longer do we have a moral dilemma in my mind, which I did have that moral dilemma, is that, okay, we can restrict energy to people and hope to save the climate, because every form of energy has CO2 emissions. We've not invented an electricity form that doesn't emit CO2. And you may question that, going, well, wait a minute. Well, you got to remember that renewable energy machines use non-renewable resources to make them, and they wear out. So we're having to constantly use resources to make machines to make our lives better. So we gave up the moral dilemma that we believe that you get more energy to more people, you help more people out of poverty, they innovate, and we've learned also that as people become more educated, they have less children, they have less disease, there's just more health. So we changed our whole company dynamic, and what we say now is our company purpose is to deliver positive energy. That's what we believe is the message to put out into the world. Now, we're a midstream company operating in 4 states in Mexico. How does that look for a company like us whenever we're thinking about delivering this positive energy? Our purpose is to build a diversified midstream platform that drives economic development, reduces energy poverty, and fosters human flourishing. And you look at our 4 pillars. They're built on growth, culture, reputation, impact. Today, I have a day job. I don't do public speaking for a living. But I believe so strongly that we've got the message so wrong. Even living in Texas, we've run out of electricity. And we've run out of electricity because of, I think, bad education on what the facts of energy are. It rises to a level of culture which is above politics. And it's been politicized and weaponized to the point where even in Texas, we produce 20 times more oil than Colorado. We produce 14 times more gas than Colorado. We drilled and completed 5,000 wells last year. Y'all did like 500. And we ran out of energy. And why do we do that? Because we put too much emphasis on the wrong thing, not on energy abundance, but on something that was not reliable during Winter Storm Uri. Our system froze, our windmill shut down, and 240 Texans died. That was another wake-up call to say that we have got to do a better job of educating people. So we made it part of our company that energy advocacy, energy education is that important. It's literally life and death. And I want more CEOs to step out from behind their industry associations, learn these facts and data, become authentic with yourself, and come out and talk. Just like the great leader, Chris Wright, that y'all have heard here. When I called Chris in 2018, we didn't know each other. I don't use oil field service companies. We're a pipeline company. He graciously took a dinner meeting with me. I just took him to dinner and asked him, like, how do you feel confident going out? And he told me his story of choosing his degree based on energy poverty and going into the nuclear sciences, and then how he found himself ultimately running a oilfield services company many years later. He seems very natural talking about this stuff. And back then I was trying to work out and sort out, well, okay, how do you build a company to align yourself with your purpose? And so this is a result of conversations like that through this time. So I wanted to share how this looks in real life on a project that we completed in Mexico. To give you background, Mexico is 130 million people. They're our largest trading partner. They're larger than China. Over $500 billion crosses the border in trade in Mexico. When we started Howard Energy, Mexico was using about a BCF to 2 BCF a day of natural gas. Today, it's America's largest energy partner. We send over 6 BCF a day to Mexico. The largest U.S. consumer of natural gas is Florida Power and Light. They only consume 2. Mexico is 3x that. Mexico is a very important trading partner. They also import a ton of propane, gasoline, and diesel and jet fuel from the U.S. So and we happen to have assets that are 6 miles from the border. So I want to show you what we did. As I think about Howard Energy's beginning and how it's evolved, it's exactly followed a meaningful endeavor path. I believe that providing more energy to more people improves lives. Countries and communities that use more energy tend to have cleaner environments. They tend to have higher education, higher literacy levels. We know this through human history, and Mexico is no different. In the energy poverty sense, whenever there's a community, a country, a state, an industry that doesn't have energy, Midstream's job is to fill that gap. There's a demand for the resource. There's someone that has the resource. Midstream's job is to build that infrastructure between the two. Mexico historically has used higher carbon intensive fuels. They've used coal, diesel, fuel oil. They burn tires in some instances for industrial heat and energy. With the United States and the shale revolution happening starting back in the 2000s, we now have an overabundance of natural gas. We're looking for places to take our natural gas demand centers. Mexico is in need of energy, and their closest and cheapest power source is natural gas.
That was a logical target for us when we thought about a place to push Texas gas toward. You know, already it was very indirect the ways that it was getting to Monterrey. There were pipelines that crossed in the valley, there were pipelines that crossed over in El Paso, but there was really nothing that was going directly to the main consumption point within Mexico at that point.
Nueva Era is a perfect example of using business as a force for good.
Nueva Era is a 200-mile, predominantly 30-inch, a little bit of 36-inch pipeline
that connects one of the largest natural gas producing basins in Texas, the Eagle Ford Shale, with the largest natural gas user in Latin America, which is Monterrey, Mexico.
Monterrey needed more power. It was so important for us to make sure that Monterrey, being the most industrialized city in the country, to have access for this natural gas that is being produced just with our neighbors in the US and specifically in Texas, how to connect that production and sufficient supply, I would say, to Monterrey.
Monterrey was about a 1.5 to 2 BCF a day gas market, but before Nueva Era. Today, now that Nueva Era is in service and flowing full, every day, it's essentially expanded the gas consumption in that market by 50%.
And so what that did was provide needed energy to Mexico, and what it provided to Texan producers is a higher price for their commodity. So it was a win-win-win between the two countries and between the two economies. There's no such thing as a low energy, high income country. We haven't invented that yet. And so by providing more energy to that geographic area, we feel like it provides more jobs, it lowers crime rates, it increases education, and it helps the overall community. And we always think that what's good for Mexico is good for Texas. And we've seen in the last 10 years, we've seen nearshoring happen, we've seen factories being built, we've seen Amazon-sized warehouses show up all along our pipeline. And it's this pipeline that has helped all that economy, and then economy creates jobs, and jobs creates better lives for people. We needed a partner in the country that are entrepreneurs, they understand infrastructure, they understand the inner workings of the government and how to get something done there from an infrastructure standpoint. We don't have that expertise. We have that expertise in the US, but we didn't have it in Mexico. We found Grupo Clisa.
What we bring to the table was many years being in the community and the trust that we have developed with them. In other words, because of Grupo Clisa being in Mexico since 1991, we have built all the trust with the community, and we put together all the technical expertise that the Howard Energy brought to the table.
But demand is never this one clear, shining, big thing just needing to be fed. If it was, everyone would have already fed it. Like, no, it's a bunch of granular and modular pieces of demand, and intertwined within that is understanding all the regulatory reasons, or regulatory and commercial reasons why that demand isn't being met. And that's what Grupo Clisa brought.
I can't overemphasize enough that without them, this project doesn't happen.
I think what we managed to do with Nueva Era was to bring a good at a lower price, in a more reliable way, in a more efficient way to a market that desperately needed it. And they're experiencing it today.
So a lot of times when you try to solve problems with humanity, people turn to philanthropy. The issue is when you look at energy and infrastructure and the amount of capital needed to solve those problems, you really need governments working with private parties and companies and capital to be able to tie all that together.
Getting gas from a cheap spot to a more highly valued spot, I mean, that's where capitalism is working. That's where free enterprise is actually adding value and increasing productivity to these markets.
That's one of the things that was really fun about Nueva Era is the government of Mexico doing a 25-year contract with a private company, using capital from pension funds and infrastructure funds, using international banks to tie a cross-border project together. It really took all these forces coming together to solve this one problem of energy poverty in this region of Mexico. Is far beyond what philanthropy could have done.
We believe that what is good for Mexico is good for the United States.
The next 30 years, the world's going to need at least 50% more energy. We believe most of that energy demand is satisfied with natural gas. Of course, nuclear, of course, geothermal, of course, solar and wind will supply some of that energy for mostly electricity use. But when it comes to industrial demand and industrial heat demand, natural gas is really the only thing that we know that's going to be satisfying that demand. We're going to be on the forefront of figuring out how to get whatever new supply the U.S. figures out to whatever demand the world needs. And we're going to be the company that's going to be right there providing those services. Y'all can clap. Very difficult project. Whenever you have to have some other conviction. Our conviction was running a meaningful endeavor. At that time, when we were building this project, it's been in service since 2018, we didn't have the words energy poverty. We wanted to help the immigration problem that South Texas was experiencing. We've been doing business in Mexico for many years prior to that. And we wanted to figure out a way to help the country, and went in with the attitude of, we have natural gas sitting here at the border at the largest natural gas producing county in the state of Texas is Webb County near Laredo. We had a gathering system that we had just started building there. We had the vision of like, y'all are putting in electricity plants. You don't want to use tires, coal, fuel oil. You want to use natural gas. We have a bunch of it. How can we work with you? And the country of Mexico believed in us enough to sign a 25-year arrangement to do that. So that project, from permitting to turning on, took about 3 years and about $1 billion. In the United States of America, the Mountain Valley Pipeline, in an area where we operate up in the Northeast, we operate in Pennsylvania. Mountain Valley Pipeline is a 300-mile pipeline going from West Virginia to Virginia. Have y'all heard of that, Mountain Valley Pipeline? Took 10 years and $7 billion. We built between two countries what we couldn't build in the Northeast in the U.S. between two states. So when we think about this energy knowledge and how it impacts bad policy, this is a classic example of doing a very historic pipeline in an area that has no eminent domain, a lot of environmental regulation. Believe it or not, Mexico has way more environmental regulations than Texas does. We had to go remove each cactus by hand, put it into a greenhouse in a central location, then replace the cactus. And if you've ever been to that part of Texas, it's a desert, so a lot of cactus. We had to, the streams, since you're in the middle of the desert, they haven't had water in it forever. We had to act like they were navigable waterways. So the perception that Mexico is an easy place to build is actually opposite of the. In the United States of America, we have about 2 million miles of pipelines. Mexico has 25,000 miles of pipelines. So they're not used to building. In the U.S., we actually know how to build things. We used to know how to build things before permitting and some of the rhetoric has stopped us from building. But we know we've built 2 million miles of pipelines, so we know kind of what we're doing. I'm going to talk about what we're doing on a larger scale here to kind of help before I get into some of the lower carbon stuff that we're talking about right now, we're starting a thing called Energy Corps, CORPS, to be the industry's nonprofit that will go in to areas and help energy poverty. Our goal, our vision, is to raise every person on the planet to at least OECD levels. OECD countries are $50,000 of GDP per person, 50 megawatts per person in 50 years. We think if we can get everybody on the planet to that level, we're going to innovate our way to all sorts of success and innovation. Energy Corps is going to be the one leading the way there. So we're going to be helping Bettering Human Lives Foundation here in Denver. We're going to be helping the Clean Cooking Alliance. We're going to be helping Mission 300 to electrify 300 million Africans in the next 10 years. So Energy Corps is going to be our platform for actually playing on a bigger scale. And hopefully more companies align themselves with this kind of narrative and this kind of work. So the other things we have going on, this is Bill Gates at one of our facilities. One of our hydrogen facilities provides a research and development plant that he's invested in to create an electrofuel. Electrofuel is a diesel that's created from hydrogen and CO2, putting it back together to form a long-chain hydrocarbon. We run and operate the largest renewable diesel facility in Texas. 40,000 barrels a day of renewable diesel. We get used cooking oil, basically Chick-fil-A grease, into our facility, send it to a renewable diesel refinery. We get back R99, put it onto trains, into ships, and send it out to people that are buying R99. We have a large carbon sequestration project that the DOE gave us funding for in the port of Corpus Christi to take all the emissions of the largest refining center close to Mexico, all the emissions out of there, to sequester them over time. And so we have a lot of low carbon emissions. That used to get a lot of airtime in the last 10 years. And we are a for-profit business, so we're only going to do things that we think that have a long-term profit. But I love interaction, and I love to get some questions. I'm a pretty open book, as you can tell. And I'll leave you with this before taking the questions. And some of these could be viewed as controversial, especially in Colorado. Is that I would posit that there is no climate crisis, that we have to live with the changing climate and learn how to adapt. Get more energy to more people increases their chances of survival. That's what I would like to see done. And to go with net zero energy poverty by 2050, because net zero emissions is thermodynamically impossible. Also, I would say that I wish we quit using energy transition. I wish we use energy mix, energy addition, anything besides transition. That gives people the wrong impression that we've actually transitioned off of something besides whale oil. That's the only one we've ever transitioned off of. Everything, we haven't transitioned off wood yet. Until we transition off wood, I can't use the word authentically transition. Fossil fuels are growing faster than renewables. Unfortunately, last year we broke records again. More coal than ever used in human history. More oil than ever used in human history. More natural gas than ever used in human history. We're going to break that record again this year. People, you'll hear how fast renewables are growing. Great. But so is the whole energy use growing. You get the company you deserve here, because as you can complain about what's going on with regulations, with permitting, with any of the things you're dealing with, and this is a call to action for everybody that has say-so inside your companies, that if you're having trouble, it's your fault. What can you do to get out in front and help lead from the front? And then finally, every energy employee. I'd love to see every energy employee impacting your PTA meeting, impacting your school that your kids go to, impact whatever you can do, whatever resources that are out there to help raise America's energy IQ. Because even in Texas, we haven't done a good job of that. And we hope to fix that. That's the end of my prepared remarks. I'd love to hear from you. So there's microphones in the back, or yell it out, and I'll repeat the questions. But I'd love to be challenged on anything that I've said here, or any comments that you may have. And we're going to have 5 before Kirby lets us out of here. So.
Good afternoon. My name is Ray Beck, former Moffat County Commissioner, and also the chair for JOLT, which stands for Joint Organizations Leading Transition, Supporting All the Above Energy. So we're on the same page you are, and I want to know when you're running for governor for the state of Colorado.
So the number one question I get is, man, are you getting ready to go into politics? And it confuses people when I've tried to integrate my life and my work with everything that I do. And I have no ambitions of being in politics. I love the life that I have. So thank you for the compliment.
If that's the case, maybe you give our state legislature and the governor some education. But having said that, I agree with you on the net zero thing. I think it's ridiculous. I don't think it's achievable, and we're on a majority of the people in this room are on the same page you are. So thank you for your presentation.
Oh, thank you. I will say, I heard all the above. That's a term I used to use too. Now I like the term best of the above, because if I'm in Ghana and coal is available to me, I want those people to be able to burn natural gas and coal freely. I don't want the World Bank restricting financing to them because they're unwilling to use an unreliable energy source. And that's what's happening today. They won't dam up rivers in certain countries or things because of the environmental impact, and people are living in mud huts. And so by changing energy thinking, and I travel to a lot of those countries a lot, and I volunteer with the Switch Energy Alliance at their case competition. Some of my teams have been from Kenya, from Saudi Arabia, from Nigeria, and it's amazing the talk of the UN and the inaccuracy of the UN, that these students in these countries believe that environmental impact is bad. And the only way we get better and come out of poverty is actually to impact the environment in the correct way and live a better life. So anyway, yes, ma'am.
Hello, Carmia Woolley, Bureau of Land Management. So a couple questions for you. So you're taking a global perspective, and I'm assuming that you're not the only one out there doing that. So the first question is, what other entities in other countries are doing similar efforts that you're seeing, and which international banks are focusing on this as well? And then my second question is, as you've evolved your company, what have been the biggest hurdles that you've faced, lessons learned, and what challenges do you foresee?
Yeah, so the first one, we just had the Rockefeller Foundation. I held an energy poverty summit that had 40 industry CEOs at it a couple weeks ago, the first one of its kind, to hopefully, show this positive view of the future. And the Rockefeller Foundation was there. The Rockefellers have traditionally been the number one funder of anti-fossil fuel information. And so it was neat to have them at our Energy Poverty Summit working together. They're the ones that have Mission 300. They informed me of quite a few development banks that they're working with right now, and they're not actually anti-fossil fuel, which I found fascinating, because that wouldn't be what Robert Bryce would say when he's tracking the funding of anti-fossil fuel rhetoric. So there are 2 or 3 development banks working right now. Everybody talks about Africa a lot. I think there's a lot more of the world than just Africa. There's only 1 billion people there. There's 6 billion in other places that could use some development money. But there are initiatives. We've not found an industry-wide coalition for that, so we hope to fix that. What was the second part of your question? Because I have an answer for it. I just forgot the question.
Okay, so first one was...
hurdles.
Yes.
Hurdles. Thank you. The number one thing that I run into is when you think about a capitalist like myself, there's a whole negativity around capitalism, as capitalism is a negative, especially during the presidential election cycles and how people view capitalism. Energy alone doesn't solve poverty, but you can't solve poverty without energy. Capitalism is the tool that helps bring people out of poverty. The free exchange of ideas, the free exchange of trade, and getting paid for a service. That is what has helped successful countries. And so the pushback I would receive is, how can education, energy advocacy, that sort of thing really help your business? Focus on your business and just look down and do what's good for you. I had a hard time finding my why with just capitalism. I had to work very hard to find my why, so I can authentically say, no, we're going to put all of our energy and integrate capitalism with our why together to see what we can accomplish. And I would say that that's a very untraditional way of thinking. You get a lot of pushback and a lot of cynicism. People say, oh yeah, sure, you're just talking your book. You just want to get on stage and talk about pro-fossil fuel because you're a fossil fuel company. It's like, no, you don't know me well enough. I'm pretty complex. I can make money a bunch of different ways. This is just one that I found that I think helps humanity the most. I think it helps humanity more than anything else combined with capitalism. So I'd say that's the biggest pushback that I've seen. I've not seen a lot of people able to challenge the theory of what we're doing, you know? And I'm not saying it's working 100% yet because we're still early on. We're only a 14-year-old company. So we're just getting started. We want to be around for decades. So you're looking at the very beginnings of a start of a company here.
And so what are the foreseeable hurdles at this point in time?
Yeah, right now, the permitting problem in the U.S. is one of our biggest problems. And I'll just say, as you look at our strategy page, we're very focused on energy export. Just because we're along the Gulf Coast of Texas, we export gasoline for Total. We export diesel to Mexico today. We export natural gas to Mexico today, and to Latin America and other places. As the U.S. goes from 100 BCF a day of production in the next 5 years to 114 BCF, because we know that 14 more BCF of LNG plants are getting built. So we got to see a 14% increase in production. The other thing we know in Texas, we talk to hyperscalers all the time in Texas. Texas is the #1 natural gas producing state by far, and a lot of data centers want to move into Texas. Electricity is a problem in Texas. And if you are following this story, turbines, transformers, breakers, transmission lines are 3+ years out. My electric provider in San Antonio, the largest municipally owned electric company in the U.S., the CPS Energy in San Antonio, Texas, they're 10 years out when a hyperscaler comes to them looking for electricity. And as I'm trying to build a $500 million plant right now in the city of Corpus Christi, at my industrial facility that Bill Gates was at, I'm finding that the forward power price curve does not meet the hurdles that I need to build something. That's why Texas hadn't put in a new natural gas-fired power plant in the last 10 years, because the power market's broken. So I think restrictions, over-regulation of pipelines, why I can build between 2 countries in 3 years, and we can't build between 2 states in 10. We can't build electric power plants. If we're going to meet the 40 to 50% of energy needs in the U.S. increase over the next 30 years, we have got to learn how to reindustrialize ourselves. If we built 2 million miles of pipelines to get us to where we're at, how many more do we have to build to get to where we're going? And if we're not going to build it, it just won't happen. That's what we've seen in Texas. We've seen it's crazy to me, as a 7th-generation Texan, the only place I've ever lived, and my ancestors, that we have run out of energy. And so I believe, and I talk to legislators like this, I talk to them, but we're just so tied up, not into anti and pro politics, just how to unwind ourselves, because we got ourselves here slowly. It's going to take time to get us there, to unwind. So I think the biggest hurdles are regulation. It's not availability of capital, it's not capitalism, it's not our structures. It has to do with the restriction of infrastructure. Yes, ma'am.
I have a culture question.
Sure.
So I too believe that we are not in a climate crisis. How do we educate our younger generations on that fact?
Yeah, Michael Schellenberger wrote a great book called Apocalypse Never. He wrote it because his 13-year-old child in California, he's in Berkeley, was so scared of what you hear a lot in California and other places about how the world is going to end. You're going to have peak oil and gas. The world is going to end. And it was that rhetoric that also got me kind of fired up to go like, oh, man. And that's why I went and saw Chris Wright like in 2018 and stepped forward. It's how to hold 2 truths. Teaching a kid that there are paradoxes in life. That, antibiotics killed a few people last year. They saved maybe a few 100,000, maybe millions of people last year. The climate might have killed a few people last year. Because of our resilience and advancement in technology, millions didn't die, a couple thousand died. to hold two truths, that terrible things can be true along with the good, and how to evaluate things as a whole. That if you just analyze the negative, of course it's going to be bad. If we drive out of here today, we're probably going to die. But the statistics say I might live, So like how to hold those truths, that if you want to not live, stay at home. Don't drive, And so I have a 9-year-old, an 11-year-old, and a 21-year-old, and it's interesting, thinking of ways to educate them in a way that they could hear. When you talk about just bad, they hear that real easy, right? Because we have a human reaction to fear and want to live. And so you say, oh, if we can transition off of bad things to get better climate, let's do that. Okay, it's just we haven't invented ways to do that. We literally don't know how to ship things around the world today. We've not invented technologies to move people around at the pace that we do today. And no one's going to reduce the amount of moving they're doing. That's a loser. I think net zero is a loser when it comes to people actually changing their habits. We have to find a way to get more energy, carbon better. And so we're investing in technologies that maybe will be viable in 80 years. Today they're not. That renewable diesel plant is $80 a gallon to produce a gallon of diesel, using my CO2 and my hydrogen. So Bill Gates can put a plant together to make $80 diesel. Well, that's not going to work, So that's a long-winded answer because it's not easy. Education is what we boil it down to and help raise IQ, but it's hard, That's a good question.
My name is Tyson Johnston, Vice President of Gunnison Energy and longtime energy advocate here in Colorado. What would you say to all of us here who are advocating for our industry in the state of Colorado when we do have a political climate that is directly affecting us? But there's also history out there, and there's known facts about how California's policies have led to their high cost of living, their income disparity, their high homeless numbers. There are a lot of things that go into that, and there have been case studies all over the country on poor management and mismanagement of legislation. What would you say to us as advocates and people who are talking to our state legislators and are talking to the various associations to try and make progress when so much of the rhetoric is uneducated rhetoric about not understanding how other places who have come before us have stumbled and fallen? That's where I really struggle, because the evidence is out there, the data is out there, the numbers are out there, but not being able to get that across seems to be the biggest problem.
Well, thank you for being an energy advocate, and thank you, in a very tough environment, being an energy advocate. Like everything meaningful I've ever done in my life, coming from where I come from and where I'm at today, and all the challenges I've overcome, there has been no silver bullet. You start with yourself and aligning yourself with your purpose and intentions. Then you look at your circle of influence, starting with your family, and then go a little broader and a little broader. And if you're already talking to state representatives and policymakers, you've probably already been on that journey a little bit. But it's looking for ways to influence your circle of influence. So the things that I do, one, I arm myself, and you can go to my website, my company website, see a bunch of books I've read, and you can dig into IPCC papers and a bunch of other stuff. I wouldn't suggest that, but but make sure you know what you're about. And then we're funding the Switch Energy Alliance, going through K through 12 education programs, giving them free resources to educate them on energy. We are funding Life Powered, which is their sole purpose is to raise America's energy IQ at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. We're talking to our legislatures. One of the things that is very good is Alex Epstein's Energy Talking Points. They're hundreds and hundreds, tweet-length energy facts online, energytalkingpoints.com, and we're into at least 200 federal offices, and those staffers just love it because they don't have to think, because they're not going to think. We give them the tools to combat whatever it is they're doing, and it's fact-based, tweet-length messaging. And so what my strategy has been is not only public speaking. I allocate about 10% of my time. I don't need to do this. I have a day job, and I like my job, But I choose to step out and do this to help people get resources to advocate in the areas you're in. And so Only thing, there is no silver bullet is to keep doing what you're doing because you're making a difference, I promise you. It just doesn't look like it. You got to look, you can't judge success quarter to quarter. You got to judge it year to year, 5 years to 5 years. And right now, y'all are in a challenging environment. You have no diversity between your governor, your Senate, and everything else. You know, it's all looking one way. And so eventually people will get tired and continue to stand up, just like we have, where you get tired of that, and more and more people start standing up to what they believe their truth is. Oh, Kirby's going to drag me off stage. Thank you, guys.